Many black Americans are actually not from the slave trade. They are not taken as slaves from Africa to America because they are the native indigenous Americans with black skin. Before Columbus, before the Europeans came to America, there were black skinned people living on the land. And history also shows with evidence that Africans were traveling and trading with Americans, the Native Americans, way, way before the Europeans came to America. So when you have a black American saying that they are not Africans, please understand.
African American, I'm an American. I am a black American. I am definitely black. There's nothing wrong with being African American, but a true African American is someone that is from Africa and moved here, either first generation or second generation, and has a tie to that country that I do not have. One of the first census in Virginia that allowed for black people to have a name was somebody from my family. So that means they were there long before. I think there comes a point where when you build a country, when you fight for freedom and generationally live in a country.
Yeah, people have a huge problem with us rejecting the African American tag now because it stops them from being able to appropriate our history and culture.
That is how I see.
Well, that's why if you really want to not offend people, stop calling people African Americans.
Yeah.
Use the word African and you're insinuating 12.5% or higher African blood. There's a lot of black races. The Africans are the only ones that are fucked. The Moorish people, all these other cultures, all these other bloodlines that would never in a million years be classified as a Negro. It even says right in the definition, all colored people, Negroes are always colored people, but not all colored people are Negroes. Literally one of the definitions right out of the book. What that definition is referring to is there's a lot of black races that are not of African descent. When you say African American, you're saying persons. You're calling them a persons. We think that's friendly. We think that's kind. And we don't realize that we're essentially insinuating that they are a released slave of African descent. And we're insinuating they are a persons and not a people. I mean, I wonder if you'd have more standing as neither than you would as a persons. Like, if I wasn't a free white man and I had to choose between being a persons or being just like nothing, I'd almost say like, I'd rather be stateless or have nothing than be a persons, than be an African. Let's say a real dark-skinned Brazilian person. You know, what is their bloodline? What is their, certain Indian tribes have very dark skin. There were people who were here in America even before us that had dark skin and they're out in the sun all the time or who knows what. And then they look even darker than they really are. All Negroes are colored people, but not all colored people are Negroes.
So escaping that matrix, learning, conditional acceptance, learning, whatever. There's so many areas to really sink your teeth into here.
No, Black Americans are American. They are not African. The vast majority of Black Americans living here today are American descendants of slavery. And because of this legacy of slavery, their connections to Africa are so distant and they have been severed that they do not have any real connections to it today. Nationality-wise, culture-wise, and everything else, they are American, not African. In fact, even the concept of ethnicity, their ethnicity would be Black American, not some form of African. And no, race does not make them African. Race is a social construct, and it's a pseudoscientific one at that. Not to mention, all human beings have their origins in Africa, depending on how far back we go. So this entire concept of, well, we have to consider the blacks African is just racism. Black Americans are American just like I am an American. I am not a European American. I have literally no connections to Europe at all. I am American, and so are Black Americans. Quit trying to divide people by the color of their skin, and instead, let people identify as they please.
This might offend some people, but calling Black Americans African in 2026 doesn't fully make sense anymore. So white people in Africa are called Africans, but Black people in America are still called African. Make it make sense. Let's see this clip and we'll be back. This conversation is uncomfortable, but it needs to be heard. Because right now there is a growing debate online about identity, specifically about Black Americans. Some people insist they must always be tied to Africa. Others are saying, hold on, that's not the full story. And today we are going to break this down in a way that actually makes sense. Let's start with something simple. When you go to South Africa, you will find white people whose ancestors came from Europe. But what do they call them? South Africans. Not Europe Africans, not immigrant African, just South Africans. Same thing in Philippines. There are dark-skinned Philippines with distant African ancestry, but nobody call them African Philippines. They are simply Philippines. Indians, same pattern. People with darker skin tone exist, but no one labeled them as African Indians. So here's the question. Why is it different for Black Americans? Black Americans have been in the United States for hundreds of years, long enough to develop a completely unique culture, history, and identity. Yet, people still try to identify them as Africans. Yes, there is an African root. That's undeniable. But roots are not same as identity. Even early historical accounts raise questions. For example, even Christian Columbus described encountering people in America with features of characteristics he compared as African. Now, whether people agree with that interpretation or not, that's a debate. But what it shows is this. The story of who existed in America and what identity means is more complex than what most people are taught. My name is Faith. Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found this channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next conversation. As always, credit to all creators whose clips are used in this episode. This video is for commentary and educational purposes. It is not meant to hate or discriminate against anyone. Let's see more clips.
Why are you not African? You're just only American?
Yeah, I'm American.
Okay, explain.
So my most recent descendants are literally from Central America and North America, indigenous Black Americans. They have the same color, the same melanin content, but they are not from Africa. I can't name any country in Africa. What I'm saying is that if I take a test right now, I could say some Italian, some German, some Australian up in there, 13% Ghanaian, 19% Nigerian, like who knows and who cares? But what I'm saying is that my immediate ancestors are American. Oh, yeah. Mine.
Are they Black?
They're Black, but they're not African. So different. The whole thing about African booty scratchers and even why Black Americans have been called African booty scratchers is because the white people have classified us all as coming from Africa because we're all Black. And that's where the whole falsified information has come, where we all come from the Atlantic slave trade and all the Black people were just shipped here to this country and all over. That's not true. We were already here. We were already here lining up every part of the world.
But if what you're saying is true, then you are more Hispanic or Asian than you are Black, because before the transatlantic slave trade, there was what they call Paleo-Indian, which those individuals...
No, and once again, you're misinformed, and that's nice.
I'm not saying that's the only people that were here, but they have Paleo-Indians, which the Aztec came from, which the, Aztec, the Inca, those tribes came from what is called Asia to some extent.
What I'm saying is that with the transatlantic Atlantic slave trade, you've been misinformed to think that there were only, paleo, white colored Indians essentially that were here. That's not true. There were Black people here, or as people say, the Moors or whatever you want to call it. There were Black people here indigenously, like they were across the whole world.
Our pyramids are older than ones found in Egypt. The European colonists took over and started calling themselves Americans and started changing the history, saying that they brought us here. We were always here. You've got pyramid kuntas in Central South America that are older than the pyramids in Giza in Misraim that the people call Egypt. Older. You've got civilization principles that are here in Lower Egypt that you call Kentucky and Tennessee area that is older than they are in what you call Egypt. But those things are held secret because they don't want these people to know that they're the heirs apparent to this land. So they branded them Negro, black, and colored to cut off the linear history. So when the people think they're Negro, black, and colored, they can't tie to the illustrious history of the founders of civilization. And as a matter of fact, they keep trying to leave and everybody else trying to come here because they don't even know that this is the hub, the North Gate. We're the true.
Here is the real issue. Identity should reflect history, culture, and lived experience, not just distant ancestry. White Americans are not constantly labeled European American, even though their ancestors came from Europe. So why is there pressure to label Black American as African first, instead of recognizing them as a distant group with their own identity? At some point, it stopped being about accuracy. It started becoming about how people choose to identify themselves. So here is the key difference and the root of the entire conversation. Ancestry is where you come from. Identity is who you become. Black Americans didn't just come from Africa. Over centuries, they built something entirely new. Culture, tradition, language, struggle, and achievement that are uniquely American. That identity didn't just disappear. It was forged through history. But the problem is, most people often simplify that identity into something easier to label. And when you do that, you erase the complexity of what Black Americans' identity actually is. Now, does that mean Africa isn't important? Of course not. Africa is part of the story, but it's not the whole story. And that's where the tension comes from. Because one side is saying, don't erase the roots. And the other side is saying, don't ignore what we have become. And honestly, both sides matter. But here is what cannot be ignored. No other group is constantly defined by their distant origin the way Black Americans are. And that's why this conversation keeps coming up. So at the end of the day, this isn't just about looks. It's about recognition. Recognition of history, recognition of identity, and recognition of the people who are more than just where their ancestors come from. If this made you think differently, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, drop your opinion in the comments respectfully, and don't forget to turn on your notification bell so you don't miss the next conversation. See you in my next episode.